Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day. Hope your week's doing equally as well. Today, folks, we're going to talk a little bit about, I guess you could say, the future. You know, you, each one of you, each one of us, right? All of us. Each one of us is a carrier of information. And that information essentially is all of our history, right? So, all of your experiences, everything that you've experienced, good or bad or indifferent, and you're carrying that forward into the future, right? And as some do and don't have families, even if it's just an impact, who you are is influencing within the DNA package, right? That houses all of our experiences, right? It's just a giant. We're just a giant recording device, really. And and you're having these experiences, and you're carrying that forward, and then you will hand that off to the next generation, and so on and so forth. But here's some, there's some tributaries to this as well, though, right? Because some of those experiences, those the conditioning that you've been developed under, again, good, bad, or indifferent, also influence the information, those information packets that you're carrying forward. And so when you think about that, you think, okay, yeah, that's not a foreign concept. It's something that I'm aware of. But the thing you have to realize is this, and this is where it starts to kind of blow up, is now look back, your parents, grandparents, great grandparents, so on and so forth, and etc., going back, right? You are also carrying all of their information forward as well, right? You're carrying all of their experiences, good, bad, or indifferent. And depending on the different eras that some of them lived through, wars, right? Pestilence, famines, strife, just general difficulty in life, traumas, betrayals, all the things, right? You are carrying that forward as well. So as you have that already embedded in your DNA, you are then layering your experiences on top of that. Now, this is my theory. My theory is that we experience life in cycles, and I believe, and I don't think there's super science to back this up, but my general theory is that it's about a 14-year cycle that you go through. Every 14 years, there's a significant transformative occurrence in your life. You could say maybe that's where the veil is the thinnest between all of who you are and all of those who you brought with you, right? Your family and those experiences, right? And when that veil gets thin at those different stages, now think about it. For, I'm male, so at 14 years, what happened when you're 14? Well, most males, I won't say all, right? Because it's not going to be the same. Life experiences and exposure can be different for everybody. But I was an athlete. And that was transformative for me as an athlete. I really started to, come into my own and, pick up my game and do some things, do some fun, cool stuff. I really surged forward from the, young man that I was when I hit that point. And then I go to 28, and I remember thinking to myself, I'm never going to be as good as I as I am now at basketball when I was playing. I mean, I would play with broken fingers. I mean, I was just uh, yeah. To say that I was into my sport is you know is an understatement. But that was about 28, right? And there are other things in my life that occurred, not just sports. I'm just using these as examples, right? Otherwise, we'd be here all day. And then you bounce forward, so bounce forward another 14 years. So for me, 32, right? Well, for all of us, 32, 42, right? So at 42, what happened then? Well, I retired from the Air Force right just before that time frame, but I started to go into a different aspect of my professional life, right? And then that took off in a different way, but the veil was thin, and there was always seemed to be this period of reflection during those times. I'm amazed I could remember these things, but there's always kind of an inward looking. And I think what happens is those cycles, and the cycles may be different for each of us, right? So I'm just using those as an example of my theory, right? Examine your own life. I've toyed with the idea that there are 3 and 4 year cycles. If males' metabolism is what, about 24% roughly faster than females, then does that mean that our cycles, you know, that their cycles are longer, right? Because there's a slower progression, right? That's just the theory. But they're different. Let's just say they're different. So look at your cycles. Look at a 3 and 4 year cycle. Look at 7. Look at 14. Play with it a little bit and see what things might align in your own life. But anyway, that's more of a sidebar. But the primary thing is this: for you to go forward in those next phases of life, you have to examine, right, and go inward, because not only do you have to kind of clean out your own closet in your own life, right, and examine some of the stumbling and fumbling that we all go through in one facet or another. Not only do we have to examine those things and clean house, right? Uh, Not only that, but we also have to examine the impact of the previous generation and the previous and the previous and all that played on us as well, right? Our tendencies, right? How often do we, oh, well, you're just like your grandfather, or you're just like your whatever. We've all heard this, right? At some point, most all of us have heard this. And probably even more of a challenge for those who are orphaned and who don't know really their history. And that's a challenge. That's a difficult thing. But you have to understand that there are probably reasons why, in some elements of your life, how you are the way you are. And that is to say that they're good or bad. It's just to say it just is, right? But we have to examine that, because now that's looking back. Now let's expand this going forward. Here's the fun, cool part: you get to reprogram your DNA. And you're probably asking yourself, what are you talking about? You can reprogram yourself. You have to reprogram yourself. But to do that, you're going to have to clean out the closet from the past and previous generations and all that. How do you do that? Well, you have to make friends and make peace with it, for sure, right? You can't be at odds with it. If you're at odds with family, a generation, like say your parents or grandparents and so on and everything, if you're at war and at odds with it, and how do you get around not being at war and at odds with it? Well, you have to intellectualize it a little bit and go, hey, they were broken because of their influences, and they weren't able to break away from the tendencies that they brought, right? So this is where we bring in all the isms. If alcoholism was in your family line, and I say as a tendency, right? You may have family members that have fallen into that pretty intensely and are stuck, right? They're stuck in that swirl and they can't break out. And it's a challenge for them. So does it require you to be judgmental and harsh? No, it requires you to have some empathy. Now, it doesn't mean you need to be up against that and living in their world and accept it, but it does mean that you have to understand it. And once you understand it from an intellectual capacity, then you can also feel some empathy toward their struggle and their challenge. But this is also within ourselves too, because even though it may not be an alcoholism, I'm using that one as an example, but there could be many. It could be subtle habits, right? Overeating, anything where we're basically doing things that aren't healthy, right? We're not in balance, right? So, but we have to acknowledge these things. When we acknowledge these things and put them in their proper perspective, it's like having a bunch of boxes thrown into your living room, right? Just randomly thrown in there. There's no order to it. But once you've examined what's in each box, put it in its proper place, and you understand, okay, this is what this is, and this is what that is. And well, now you can go through the room, right? The room of you, much more easily because everything is in its appropriate place. That isn't to say you've compartmentalized it to avoid it. It is to say that you've examined it and put it in its proper context, right? Now, what have you done? You kind of defragged yourself, right? If you're not familiar with that, it's deep, like when we used to defrag our computers, old school way, and it would show how all the files were, cleaning themselves and then reorganizing and so forth, right? To create what? More room on the hard drive. Sound familiar? To do what? We do these things so that we can now understand ourselves and say, oh, now I have more room to grow. I have more room. I'm free, right? I don't feel weighted by all the confusion of all of that stuff not being in its proper context. Now, I'm talking about it in a very sequential way, but what you have to understand is that it's much more difficult at times and with certain people and with certain situations. Some of these things are hard embedded in tradition as well, right? So separating the person from their ism is very difficult. They may be the perfect representative of the isms, right? So, so part of being able to put it in its proper context is to understand, well, it is what it is, and it's right over there, and it's nothing I need to deal with, right? But at least I'm aware of it. And I'm aware that XYZ didn't break out of it, but I was fortunate enough to break out of it. Or it may be a motivator for you to go, how much of that do I have in me? And what's controlling me? Now, I'll give you an example for myself. I've got a sweet tooth. I've got a sweet tooth. And I have to, I have to gauge myself. I mean, I'm not the person that would like buy candy bars and just, I'm not like that. I'm definitely not like that now. Maybe when I was a little kid, like all little kids, we probably were more like that. And to the extent that rather than buying a candy bar or something, I'll get like Junior Mints and I'll have one or two, just a little bit of a little sugar, not like a ton, right? I don't need to gorge myself on sugar, but I do have a sweet tooth, and I am aware of this. And that is my challenge. My challenge is to be aware that I can't let my sweet tooth get away from me, right? Because it's not healthy. Sugar, anything to excess, is not good. It's an ism, right? And then your blood sugar and all the things, right? So it's a health thing. And that's the thing we also have to realize as we're going through all this, right? Not a doctor. See your doctor, dietitian, and all the professionals about anything you need to delve into. This is me having a conversation with you. But here's the thing. By delving into these things, you can recognize, right, the patterns. And if you recognize the patterns, you have to recognize them before you can break those patterns. At least turn those patterns to your benefit. The main thing to remember is you essentially have to go back, clean up your hard drive, right, to make way for the future. And then as you start to move into the future, understand, you've broken some of the paradigms, broken some of the isms and the habits and so forth, or at least understand them and have them in control and balance, right? That's really what we're shooting for. But you've created more capacity. Now as you go forward, when I talked about, oh, can I reprogram? Well, certainly you can reprogram yourself. You're just conditioning yourself, right? We get conditioned from the external world all the time. Marketing, essentially, in the world, as we see it today, is conditioning you to respond in a perfect way. Do you think I got a sweet tooth by accident? No, I was exposed to it when I was a kid, probably, right? And so on and so forth. So those things come from somewhere. And a lot of times our own marketing and so forth influence us in such a way. Even our phones, right? People, we used to stand in line to get the next phone and all this stuff, right? And people would be falling all over themselves for the newest and latest and greatest. And we still do that to some level, right? When we get in these kicks. The hedonic treadmill. Look up hedonic treadmill if you don't know what that is. It's a little bit like the whole idea of keeping up with the Joneses, right? I got a car. Well, my neighbor got a little bit nicer car. Well, and then I decide to get a nicer car than that. And then they get a nicer car than that. And it's a hedonic treadmill. And you keep doing that. Well, we do that with ourselves anyway. We do that with our own lives. Not to mention, some people playing the whole game in society, right? Oh, I have to have the latest and greatest. Mine has to be the best and the first, and all these things, right? And sometimes we can do that, and it's fun. You know, we have hobbies and interests, and we do these sorts of things. But if it gets out of control, it's an ism, right? Now it's become a habit. It's become something that's controlling me, and it is what influencing my rewrite of my programming, right? I'm trying to rewrite my programming so that I'm healthier, right? Diet wise, exercise wise, exposure to, things I don't need to have, steering clear from excessive isms, right? Getting the proper rest, right? The best that we can. We have days, right? This is also a struggle for us within our culture. But also, just you go all the way around your life, and you strive for balance in most of these areas. When you do that, you find that your life tends to balance out. You tend to be a little bit more calm. If you're struggling with anxieties and these sorts of things, you might examine your caffeine intake. I mean, look at how people are hyper addicted to coffee and caffeine, right? Hey, I have a sweet tooth. Caffeine falls into the category as well for me, but I'm aware of it, so it's not out of balance. But if you have get on a kick where it's out of balance, or we have all the energy drinks and we have all the things, right, that just soup us up so that we can bust through the day and do the thing. But then what we find is if you depend on those things, then they're going to start having a negative impact on you, right? Be like putting rocket fuel in your vehicle, right? You might get away with it the first time you run it, but after that, it's probably not going to do your vehicle too well. Even though you probably wouldn't get away with it the first time either. But the point is that if you want to be able to rewrite, your you, right? And you might be thinking, well, why do I want to rewrite? Not rewrite you. Probably said that incorrectly. If you want to write your code, right? You're basically your own software engineer, right? If you want to write your code for a better life and you want to affect the future, you got to first fix the broken code from the past, delete that out, get that out, put it in its proper context, put it away, But then you got to then create space and then write new code. This is the code for my life going forward. This is the plan, the path, the scheme, the schematic, right, for the plans, the drawings for my life going forward. And then you get to rewrite that. The difficulty that people run into is that they're carrying a lot of the emotional, the physical, the emotional, all the things, right, from past, not even just your past, but past generations and so on, families, extended families, all these things. You're carrying those with you, and you just can't. You have to, at some point, you have to understand that you're living your own life, right? And that isn't to say, oh, I live my own life and I'm just going to go, run wild. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about living your own life, not carrying the baggage. That's what carrying the baggage means, right? It could be just relationships, past failed relationships. But, I say it in that sense so you understand what I'm talking about. But is it failed, or did you learn from it? Oh, it was a class. It was a lesson. Okay, you learned the lesson. Now you break out of that cycle and then you move forward. You freed the other person and you freed yourself. You are now free to then, and then what's scary is people become free, and then there's that self-examination, that quiet period, and that scares folks. And you shouldn't be scared by it. Just understand you're going to be a little, scared. Don't run to an ism, okay? Don't run to any behavior or ignore it or distract yourself with being busy, over busy, workaholic, workaholism, whatever. Don't go down that path either, because that's not healthy. You're just distracting yourself from dealing with the issue. Face the issue head on. If you need to find professional counseling, do so. Right? Talk it out. Work it out, talk it out, get through it, put it in its proper context so you can move on. That way, you can now live freely to write your own code, right? The code of your life. And then what you find is when you do that, this is going to affect your future. This is going to affect positively the future of your family. This is going to affect your friends. This is going to affect your work environment. You changing your own, updating and making your code more healthy is going to have a domino effect on the rest of culture, right? And that's why we're talking about it today. So, just a little talk about the future, right? All right, folks, remember, hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day, right? To uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage other people. And when we do this, not only are we helping those folks and helping to transform culture, but we're transforming ourselves. We're writing our own code in a positive, healthy way, right? And that's a good thing. Never take it for granted. You have a lot of power, positive power that comes from your heart, your mind, right? The soul of you, right? Apply all these things in a good way, and you're going to see good results. All right, folks. Hope you have a fantastic week. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.